So let's get started in time. Hello and welcome to my second session here at the DevOpsCon in Munich. I'm very happy to be here to talk about the topic here in my second session that we use every single day in our lives as DevOps developers. It's about application insights. It's about application insights, the service from Azure that can be used for telemetry, logging, and so on, for infrastructure as a service, for platform as a service, and various other things. I decided to take maybe a little bit different approach for this session. So my goal is not to show you in detail or talk to you in detail based on slides what application insights can do from A to Z, but instead I want to start by showing you how we use application insights in our everyday life. So I take a test cluster of our own software as a service solution, which is called Time Cockpit, and we will take a live glance into our own telemetry data from this test cluster, okay? Next, I will show you what it means to embed application insights into a small application. I will take .NET Core and .NET as two examples, but don't run away if you are not a dev person, okay? I'm sure you will understand what I do. It's more the concept of what is the right approach, and to give you an impression how much work or how little work it is to embed application insights into your application. So this will not be a dev session, and it will not see me typing lots and lots of code, okay? That's not the goal. So these are the two areas where we'll dive into this session, and yeah, I hope it will be fun for all of you. Let me quickly introduce myself before I start. My name is Stropek. I come from Austria. I have my own little company which is called Software Architects. It is born in the cloud. We have been using clouds, namely Azure, for nearly 10 years now. We run our own applications, software as a service, in the cloud, so we know what it means to run software as a service. We help customers, small and large, to be successful with software as a service in the cloud. That's essentially what we do. I do a lot of work with Microsoft. I'm not on Microsoft's payroll, to make that very clear. I'm just a user, a customer, and a consultant in the Microsoft area. And for that, I'm an MVP for Azure development technology, mainly Visual Studio and things like that, and the regional director, meaning I am a little bit the voice of the community in Redmond and a little bit the voice of Redmond in the community. That's essentially what. Okay. As you can see, we start with the demo. I will not tell you what application is in theory. I want to show you. Let's start with a problem. What is the problem? Why do we need something like application insights? I mean, if you use, for instance, .NET a lot, like I do, in the ancient days, what did we do in .NET? We used some kind of logging frameworks, and we wrote our logs and messages in Windows event log, or maybe in a file, in some kind of log file. And when something broke, we took a look in the Windows event log, or we opened the file with any kind of file viewer and took a look what happened. And if we are in a larger context, we had tools that gathered the Windows event log or the log files or whatever from our different servers, and they pulled it down, entered it in a large database, and from there the ops guys, the admin specialists could take a look at it and provide me some nice full text search and so on. Application Insights is different. Application Insights has been built for a world of microservices, serverless, platform as a service, and things like that. What's different with microservices, platform as a service, and things like that? The difference is that there is no server anymore. I'm sure you have heard the term serverless quite often at this conference or in the last months. What does serverless mean? Serverless does not mean that there is no server anymore. There are servers, believe me. But they are abstracted from you. You don't see them. You just take your code, you upload it, in my case, to Azure, and you say, run it. Scale it as necessary, and if you have to do an update, hey, leave me alone, do whatever you have to do, but I don't want to care about servers. I don't want to care about updates. How many servers, if they are large or small, just do it, okay? So compute comes out of the platform as a service serverless cloud, and electricity comes from the plug. Okay, it's something like this, okay? That does not mean that there is no complexity of servers in the back. but we don't care about them. And if we don't care about them, we cannot rely on any kind of logging and telemetry infrastructure that is somehow bound to servers. I cannot create a file in my serverless infrastructure and pull it down in any kind of database to do some central logging. It's not possible because I have no access to this server. I cannot use Windows event log because now I'm on this server and maybe some milliseconds later I'm on this server. I don't know and I don't care. So what we need is some kind of central platform as a service component that has APIs for all major programming languages, so that makes it super simple for developers to just add a few lines of code to their code base, and all their logging, all their telemetry, their dependency calls, executing a SQL statement against this database, loading some data from different, I don't know, downstream microservice, something like this, should automatically be logged in application insights, in this central logging component. I want a logging component that gathers data about all my complex microservices, my distributed system, and that gives me an integrated view about all of them. And I want an intelligent system where I don't have to configure the different reports and dashboards. I want a system to apply machine learning, deep learning, statistical analysis, and contact me actively, send me an email when it thinks it has some interesting findings. An unusual raise in response time, or maybe it could propose me an interesting index it had found in my SQL database that could enhance performance if I apply it to my database. I don't want to configure this. I want the system to be intelligent and to do that for me. And exactly that is what Application Insight is. Application Insights is a huge cluster of services with storage in the backend that has REST APIs where your agents could be a .NET application, a Node application, a PHP application. It could be a small agent that you install on a Windows server, okay, that just monitors CPU utilization and things like that. They all send REST APIs to this central logging component provided by Microsoft. They store this stuff. They do the machine learning, the data analysis, and they give you a nice portal and a nice query language with which you can get out the data and information that you want. That is what Application Insights is all about. Let me show you how it looks like once you have created it. Here we are. This is the Azure Portal. Let me make it a little bit larger. This is the Azure Portal, and in that case, I'm here in one of our test clusters. It's essentially a web application. And the first thing that I want to see is I want to see a map of my application. And here I click on this app map, and this is real data. Let me quickly change the time frame a little bit. Let's say the last 7 days, okay? Let's take a look what happened in the last 7 days. Did I draw this diagram? No, of course not. I did not draw this diagram. This diagram was generated by Application Insights. It tells me, for instance, that there is a client. It is a web client, okay? We have an availability test that tests the availability of my web application, and it currently says that we have an availability in this test cluster of our application of 99.5%. And here we see our backend. We respond on average after 200 milliseconds, and the fact that we have a web client that is talking to a kind of web service or web API has never been defined anywhere. We just installed our agent in the web app, we installed it in the web API layer, and we installed it on any other system that we have. And the system automatically connected the dots and understood that these two things belong together. And we also see that our backend makes some calls to downstream web APIs. I will not go into the very details here, but we have some other microservices that happen in the background. For instance, a microservice that has something to do with authentication, for instance, or a microservice, or in this case it's not a microservice, it's a database. It uses some database clusters. In this case, it uses 4 database clusters in Azure, and it did some SQL statement. And you see the milliseconds, how many queries were issued to the SQL database clusters, and so on. And here we see that we accessed some Azure blobs. And we see that we have in that area, it seems that we have a problem. This could be now something where I dive deeper into it. In that case, it happens that I know what the root cause is of this problem, so I will not dive deeper, but I think you get the point. We see a complex infrastructure and we don't have to actively model it or something. We just throw our application insights agents into it, it gathers the data and it analyzes this data and then it understands what happens, okay? But what's even more important for us is the analytics part. Analytics is a kind of query language that makes it possible to really write your own queries against your telemetry data. I took some examples, for instance. Let's take that one, and I will show you in a second how that works. Let's run it. Oh, we don't have some demo data here. Let's take that one. Okay. Okay. I will not go into the very details of the different colors here, but let me zoom in a little bit so you get the idea what this report is all about. In that case, I am interested in the number of requests that came into my system. I want only to view the last 30 days, and I want to exclude some specific users. I exclude our own users that we used maybe in this test cluster for doing some test work. After that, I'm counting this thing and I'm grouping it by account ID. We have a SaaS solution, so we have multiple tenants, meaning customers. And inside of each customer, I'm grouping the number of requests by user, meaning the specific user inside of this tenant. And then I'm rendering this thing as a bar chart. And with that, I immediately see that I have two customers in this test cluster. These two, the names are just any kind of letters. I could look them up in our tenant directory so I know which customer is what. And I could hover over the different color items here and I could immediately see how many requests came from which user, and I can find out whether this is something where I have to take action. You get the idea? Okay? So this query language up there is really very powerful. Of course, I can also take a look at the details by looking at the table. I will not show the very details, but because you would see some data that I don't want to show. It's just the charting here, and I can then take this data and export it. For instance, export it to Excel, do some further analysis. But for us, it's even more important to be able to export this data to Power BI. Have you heard about Power BI? Power BI is a free or pay-for tool, it depends on which features you use, from Microsoft, and you can build impressive dashboards with that. Interactive dashboards where you can drill down, drill through multiple pages and so on. So you can take this data and export it. For instance, if you are going in a meeting, in a DevOps meeting, where you have to, I don't know, argue why your service level agreement is so great, that you are doing so a great job in terms of performance and response times, then Power BI can be a great tool to show, to visualize your telemetry data, for instance. And you know what? Let's take a different approach here. Let's take, which one is that? Yep, this one is good. This one is good. Let's again take the last 30 days, because in this test cluster, it seems that we didn't have some data in the last few days, but fine. So what we see here is one bar per day. And we see a pattern here. We see a pattern. This is typically a weekend. Here we have another weekend. And we have the number of HTTP codes and things like that. Queries like that are important for us because we get an idea of how we have to scale our microservices and our web farms and databases. We live in the cloud, so scaling our system, making it larger or adding nodes is very simple. It's really just a single line of PowerShell or Bash, or just a slider in a website where I can say, give me 3 more servers, save, and 10 seconds later I have 3 more servers in my web farm. It's trivial. The same is true for databases. Do you want to have more power, more CPU, more memory? If we see that we have problems with our SQL statements, we can go on. take a slider, move it to the right, hit save, and 30 seconds later we have a larger database cluster. This is really trivial in platform as a service. The complex thing is to optimize these things, to know when do you need how many resources, and for that we have to understand the utilization of our CPU-bound workloads and our I/O-bound workloads and databases. And such reports give me way better insight into our entire infrastructure and how we have to scale our systems. And at the end of the day, it's not just a tool for troubleshooting, it's a tool for cost optimization. And that means that I, as a DevOps person, am no longer just in the role of hunting bugs, but I can really positively influence the gross margin, the result of my company's business by right scaling my infrastructure, by not only focusing on stack traces and error messages, but also a lot on telemetry. You get the idea? Okay? And these queries, they help a lot. And recently, some months ago, Microsoft opened up this analytics thing. So now they offer REST APIs where you can programmatically send those queries to application insights, and you can get back this raw data from your application perspective. So you can build nice support portals, for instance, for your support team. Maybe your support team don't want to deal with the whole Azure portal. They want to have an integrated view. And you can now provide them this kind of internal DevOps portals where you embed these queries behind the scenes and get all the necessary logging and telemetry data. Okay? So this is the analytics part. Any questions so far? Nice. So let's go to the slides now that you have seen what this application insights is from a user's perspective. And let's talk a little bit more complete about what the feature set is and where this all is heading towards. Application Insights is a tool that is in the category of application performance management. It's platform as a service, so to make some questions very clear at the beginning, no, you cannot install Application Insights in your own data center. It's simply not possible, it's not available. It's just a service. Yes, you can use this service from any network. You can use Application Insights even though you are running your applications in your own data center. Yes, you can use this service if you run your application in a different cloud or at a hosting provider. But your telemetry and log data will be stored and processed by Microsoft. You can, in details, define where you want this data to go to. So you can say keep it in the European Union with European data protection laws and things like that. But at least the telemetry data goes to Microsoft. You don't have to store your databases there. You don't have to run your web service there. It's really up to you. At the end, the data comes in via REST, okay? HTTP. That is what travels to Microsoft, not your data. Of course, if you run your application inside of Microsoft with their PaaS services, things are much more easy. But yeah, it's possible. Application Insights has been optimized for web workloads, meaning websites and web APIs. So Application Insights shines if you are in this microservice world where you have a lot of web traffic, HTTP, HTTPS WebSockets, then Application Insights is great. If you are more into mobile development, where you want crash reports and all the details from your mobile devices, then Microsoft has acquired a different application, which is called Hockey App. It was originally developed here in Germany. They acquired this tool, and now they are putting these two works together. So the backend of Hockey App is already Application Insights. But these are two different offerings. In the backend, they already are merged together, but this merge is not 100% complete, but they are going to that. So this is primarily for servers, microservices, and web workload. So what can Application Insights do? It can collect the data. And to make it very clear what we are talking about here, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of applications consisting again of dozens of microservices sending low-level telemetry data maybe dozens or hundreds of messages per second to a single huge infrastructure at Microsoft. We are talking about terabytes and petabytes every day that is thrown at application insights and analyzed in that way. So this is really a huge thing, and this is the reason why Microsoft cannot offer this tool for on-premises install, because this tool has been built and optimized for the size and scaling of the Azure cloud. It needs a full-blown cloud infrastructure in the backend, otherwise it cannot do its job. Okay? So Microsoft didn't implement it primarily for on-premises, and now they are adding some cloudish also offering. No, this is a tool that has been built cloud first. And the prerequisites for running this stuff on-premise would be so huge that it doesn't make any sense to offer it. It is only offered for those companies that run their own instance of Azure. So for instance, the Deutsche Telekom, who runs the Azure data centers in Germany, of course, they can install it. But for a typical company or even enterprise, it's just Azure. It's a ready-made solution. That means no servers, no configuration, no programming. It's just, platform as a service. We'll take a look at that later. What can it cover? First, HTTP response in any case. So response times, response status codes, and all this stuff is gathered. So if you are on HTTP-based microservices, you get all the nice things from the client, web application, to the server, web APIs, from how long did every single request take, when did it come in, when was it sent back, and so on. The next, dependency calls. So if your application calls a downstream web API and this calls a downstream web API, these things are linked and you see a map across all your web APIs, and you can choose which microservices use a common application insights instance. So you can give every microservice its own application insights instance. Then these things are not put together. Then they are isolated. Or you can put them in a common application insights instance. Then you see them all together. So it's up to you as an ops guy to decide what belongs logically together, what do I want to query and analyze as a whole, and where do I not need this gathering of massive data together, because these are distinct systems. Dependencies, as I said, HTTP, SQL, these things are gathered automatically in most of the programming languages. In .NET, for instance, you don't have to write a single line of code. Every SQL statement against an SQL server is tracked automatically. If you have a dependency that is not tracked automatically, you have to add one line of code that says, track my dependency call, and then it's tracked. Exceptions, client, server. So you see every call stack on the server side and JavaScript on the client side. Okay? That's tracked automatically. Diagnostic logs, if you want. So if you have some kind of tracing mechanism, or you have a logging tool in your .NET or Node or PHP or whatever application, or Java, then these log statements can be redirected to application insights. So it's not only telemetry, but it's also logging. So you can query the logs and view all the logs. You can view for texts and so on. You can add arbitrary data, user data, wherever you want. That can be metadata, for instance, applying some additional properties to an incoming request. This is that tenant or that user or that custom ID or whatever you want to add. But you can also add arbitrary statistics. For instance, if you want to add your own measurements, like how long did my billing cycle take, so that the dashboard then can show you the average amount of time your billing cycle takes for your billing solution. You get the idea. So you can add any kind of metrics, and application insights can gather this metric, and you can then use it in analytics on the one hand side, and you can use it in the dashboards to visualize these metrics. Yeah. If you're more in the infrastructure as a service side, so if you are running your own servers, your own Windows servers or your Linux servers, and you want to gather performance counters, for instance, CPU, memory usage, things like that, then Microsoft gives you an installer that you can use and install on your servers. Then you need administrative permissions. You add software in MSI, and then you can configure which performance metrics should be sent to application insights. This is, of course, not possible if you live like I in a platform as a service way, where you can't install any software in the servers because they are managed by Microsoft. Okay? Then you have to add the telemetry in your software. But if you have existing software, maybe from a third-party company, and you cannot add code there because the code doesn't belong to you, then you can at least gather the metrics on a server level. Okay? That's possible. And the servers don't need to stand in Azure. They can be on-premises service too. And of course, anything with the API, you can send anything there. Yeah, I've talked about that. I will show you the Visual Studio integration later on. Yeah, we can go across that. So with that, I would like to do a little demo and show you what does it mean to start with application insight from scratch. Okay? Now we step in the shoes of a developer. As I said, we are not going to write a lot of code. I want to just give you an impression how it works. And then we write some lines of code, and we immediately will see how application insights changes the way we approach this whole logging and telemetry stuff. Who has absolutely no knowledge and experience with Azure? Who has some existing applications in Azure? Okay. Who has a little bit idea of what Azure is, but not much? Okay, most of them. Okay, I see. So what I do here, I will talk a little bit about what I do here, is I'm going to start from scratch and create a new resource group. Let's call it DevOpsCon Live. A resource group is something like a physical data center is often structured in some kind of areas, maybe cages, really steel cages, where you have a separate door and you have a key, and only the department that has servers in this area, they have the key and they can go in the cage and manage the servers, for instance. This is the digital analogy to such a metal case. Okay, a resource group is a groupings of PaaS or IaaS instances, and you can define access permissions on this area. So typically, one microservice with its storage and its web servers and maybe application insights and whatever it needs to perform its task has their own resource group. So now I've added a resource group here. Okay, let's go into this resource group. It's empty. And what does it take me to set up application insights? Well, I go into create and I tell the system, give me application insights. Okay. Here we are, application insights. I click on create and I give it a name, DevOpsCon Live. I can add an application type. I zoom in a little bit. Application type could be ASP.NET, Java, Node.js, and so on. It doesn't change the functionality of application insights, what I select here. It just changes the default dashboards and the nice little charts and so on. So they pre-create some charts that they think make sense, okay? That is what they do. So in our case, we're going to write ASP.NET and we're going, and we can choose the location. The location is important because this is personal identifiable data. This is PII. This is data security and this is data protection relevant. So it makes it different where you store this data. And it's super important that you select the appropriate location here. Okay? In my case, I'm going to select West Europe, which is a data center complex near Amsterdam, so in Holland, in the Netherlands. And there our data will remain. Okay. Now, my application insights instance is provisioned, and you see this didn't take us long. We are done. This is now our application insights. Of course, you've seen that there is no creation of VMs and adding some software involved. It's just, it's platform as a service, of course. If I take a look here. I don't have any data, I don't have response times, I have an empty application map, nothing like that. I can take a look at the left-hand side. For instance, I could do things like getting started, and I get a little information. For instance, if I want to have server monitoring, I could click on that, and here I could download some software, as I said, some agents that I can install on my servers and things like that. If I'm more the JavaScript developer, I click here and I get some script snippets, some JavaScript snippets that I can copy and paste into my solution, or as a .NET developer, I get redirected to the documentation where I can read more things. In my case, I will be your guide, so we don't need to read all this stuff. Now let's run, whoops, that was the wrong one. Let's close this project, we don't need it. We create a new one. Close solution. Nice. Let's create a new project. A very simple web application. A very, very simple web application. Let's call it DevOpsCon Live, and this is my great web app, for instance. Okay. And I could click on web application, and then the system would generate me a bunch of code, and I could click F5 and everything works magically. I don't want to go this road, okay? I want to take the empty one, and I want to show you step by step what happens in the background, and I want you to understand how the pieces work together. Click on OK. This now creates a more or less empty web application, and even if you don't know how to program ASP.NET, I'm quite sure you will guess what this web application does. It just says hello world. For every request that's coming in, it says hello world. I can immediately try this guy, hit on play. It will compile my code. This will take a second. It will run a console app. This is .NET Core, so this runs exactly identically on Linux, on macOS, and on Windows. It's cross-platform, it's open source, there is no closed source involved, it's just cross-platform. And you see, here it is. It's just a console application, that's it. Nothing very special and fancy. Let's make it a little bit more interesting, and these are the only, let's say, I don't know, 5 lines of code or so that I'm going to write. I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I want to use a framework which is called MVC, Model View Controller. This is just a framework that your dev people use. Maybe if you are on the dev side too, you know what MVC is. If you use Node.js, you would add Express as a framework. If you use Java, I'm not a Java guy, you would use any other framework. And down there, we would say, app.use MVC. That's it. Now we have a framework, a larger framework, and now we can build a microservice. Sounds fancy, very simple. Public, let's call it our heroes controller. Okay. Public class, of course, sorry. Okay. And now we can, I don't know who has ever built a microservice. We are going to build a very fancy microservice. HTTP GET, and it should listen to API heroes, and we say public string get all, and we say return. Now maybe we have some idea. We return a string array, multiple heroes. What are we going to return? Superman, and I don't know, Batman, and Catwoman, and Deadpool. Okay, so we have old ones and new ones and everything's fine. Okay, please imagine that what we have written here is a complex microservice, okay? You do a lot of stuff here. You do database access, calling downstream web APIs, you have complex APIs, and this is only one microservice out of dozens and hundreds, okay? And now, what do we have to do if we want to add telemetry and logging and things like that to this microservice? Let's take a look. First, let's try it without application insights. Let's run it. And if the demo gods are smiling, I should be able to say /API heroes. And we get, whoa, Superman, Batman, Catwoman, and Deadpool. Great, it worked. So if we want to add application insights, what we essentially do is we click here in Visual Studio and say add connected service. And I will tell you in a second what's happening behind the scenes. We say add monitoring with application insights. How much code do we have to write? We say give me application insights from my Azure cloud. I'm asked for my credentials. Reiner@timecockpit.com. This is the name of my demo user as a personal account. And now I have configured multi-factor authentication, so it don't ask me for a password. It says send notification. Now my phone rings, and I click on my phone, and I say yes, I want to confirm. That's okay. Now it asks me for a specific code, and I'm logged in. Nice. So this is important. If you work with Azure and Visual Studio, please don't rely on passwords anymore. It's not necessary. There is a nice mobile app that you can install on iOS, on Android, on any other phone, and with that you get instant authentication, either with a pattern or with your thumbprint or with an ID, whatever you want to have. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. So add this extra level of security, please. It really makes sense. So here we have our subscription, and in that case, I will tell the system I want to use the application insights that we created a second ago. Can you remember? We were in the portal and said create new application insights. It took us 10 seconds and then we had it, and here we selected. So we connect these two things together and we hit register. Now it's doing some magic, and I will tell you in a second what the magic is. And with that we are done. We add the SDK too. So we are done. So what happened behind the scenes? Two things happened. First, a configuration file was added. And this is a very important thing that you have to take away with you if you want to dive into application insights. Let's go back to the resource group here and go into DevOpsCon Live. And here we have our application insights. And where is it? Here it is. Here. This instrumentation key. This one. This is the connection from all your microservices and servers to application insights. So essentially it's a GUID. Every application insights gets a GUID, and whatever you want to connect to an application insights backend, you have to copy this GUID into the component. And if you want 500 application insights, you create 500 of them, then you have 500 GUIDs, and then you can decide, okay, this logs there and this logs there, and you can of course change these instrumentation keys whenever you want. Okay? These application insights instrumentation keys allows only to write into this thing. You cannot read data, so it's not a super secret. You shouldn't post it on Twitter, but it's not a secret, meaning that you have to protect it with your life. That's not the case. So in our case, what it creates... Yeah, question? Yeah, of course we can. Yeah, we can. Give me a second. I can add it. Of course. So the instrumentation key was added to this config file, and the other thing that happened was it added a so-called package. Every programming language, I don't know if you are in the programming world, every programming language has a package manager. For Node, this is called a Node package manager. For Python, it's called pip. For C#, it's called NuGet. Essentially, it's a library source where you pull down some existing libraries and add it to your code. The point here is, we don't have to write a single line of code. It's just a library and a config GUID, and that's it. Now we get telemetry and logging out of the box. Let's try it. If we run this guy, okay, see? And if we add API heroes and maybe we access it a few times, and if you look very closely here in the background, you see that? Visual Studio recognized that your application is talking to application insights and gives the developer, during development, already the possibility to peek into application insights to understand what's happening. This is really useful if you are debugging, if you are hunting a bug in a non-trivial distributed microservices architecture. You have your code, you have your Node and your Python stuff and your C# stuff. In this case, I have it in Visual Studio, and Visual Studio recognizes that all these components are writing to application insights, and I can immediately take a look what's happening. Let me show you what I mean. I go to application insights here, and I have my viewer here directly in application insights. And what we, for instance, see is that here we have a GET request. See that? I can click on it, and I can take a look at the very details. I see, for instance, the IP address. Well, it's from localhost. I see the timing information. I see, in that case, the server. I see the operation name. It was GET request. And I can add a lot of metadata to these things. That is what I meant with metadata. I could add the user's name or the customer name or whatever, some billing related data if you have usage-based billing, you could take this data as basis for your rating and billing things. This is extensible, what you see here. Okay. We also see that requests that failed, for instance, response code 404, you see that one? We didn't write any code to cover internal server errors or not found errors or things like that. It was added automatically through this library that we added, and this works the same for all applications. In that case, we see that we haven't added a fav icon. This is the nice icon in the browser on the left upper corner of your tab. Okay, so that's okay. No, we have a 404 here. That's perfectly fine. Okay, nice. Let's go into our code. If you take a look at the startup code here, then we see something very interesting. Visual Studio, or your devs, will love application insights because it adds live data from application insights directly into the source code. So if you work on this microservice that maybe does some data, fancy stuff with your product database or your customers and so on, I see live telemetry data. In that case, it recognizes that we are currently debugging Visual Studio, so it says six requests, but it says 0 requests from the live system because we don't have anything deployed to a production server. Okay, if we would have this thing in production, we would see the results from our debugging stuff locally, and we would see the real data from application insights, and we could directly drill into the real data here. This is called test in production. It doesn't mean let the customer test and maybe he finds some bugs. This means when I'm writing code, I immediately want to see the results from this code, or I want to understand where the problems come from. Because here I can drill down into the details. I can click on it, you see the live one here, and if I click on that one, I immediately jump into the viewer and I can drill into the requests. This is horribly useful if you have a live deployed system and you want to understand which requests, GET requests in that case, led to maybe an exception that you're currently debugging and trying to fix. You get the idea? Okay? This is tooling. So if you don't use Visual Studio, but you use any kind of open source tool like Visual Studio Code, Atom Editor, or something like this, then you have to do this step manually, but still, it is there. Of course, I can show you now that our data is already, hopefully, already reaching our application insight. This is now the application insights thing. And what we see here is that we already, that it has already analyzed the view data that we sent. It received 44 traces here until now. And what it does, it applies now a very limited, but you see it already, it applies some statistics of machine learning. What it does, it takes all the different properties, like IP address, HTTP verb, and so on, and tries to find clusters. So in that case, it tells me, hey Rainer, I have 6 traces that have 8 common properties, and that led to an HTTP, what is that? No, a fav icon, for instance. Okay? And I can click on it, and so it tries to find clusters that have common properties. For instance, what properties led to a certain problem? With that, I can immediately identify, oh, all my problems come from a certain customer or come from a certain API without me having to group the data and so on. This is what I meant with intelligence, okay? If you have downstream queries, for instance, to a database, and the database is managed by Microsoft, it's a PaaS database SQL Server, for instance, then it also adds the data, the deep learning data from index optimization. So inside on my application map, it will tell me that this database down there, that there would be an index recommendation that would increase the performance of my overall system by approximately so and so many percentage. So it brings together telemetry data and log data from your application and from the PaaS systems that are running in Azure. Of course, if you don't run your databases in Azure, if you run it by hand yourself, then you have to do this work. Yeah, of course, but you can if you want. So, you wanted to see some telemetry data? Absolutely no problem. What we can do is we can private telemetry, new telemetry client, telemetry client, and then we could, for instance, say telemetry, I did a typo here, telemetry, no, telemetry dot, and now I can do various things. For instance, I could say track event here, and I can say, I don't know, something bad happened, okay? And that's it. That's a custom telemetry. So with that, I can easily add the API, and the same is true for Node, PHP, and so on. It's all the same. Let me quickly open something that I prepared for you that maybe give you a more detailed view, and let's close with this example. In this example, we have a more complex thing. What we have is we have some kind of web front end. It's a web application, and we have some backend microservice, and this microservice, if we take a look, uses some SQL to query some heroes from a database. And what I did with that application is I published it already to Azure. So I'm running it here in a web farm. The backend, let's take a look at the backend. Okay, API heroes, here it is. See, we have Bruce Wayne, Clark Kent, and Wade Winston Wilson. And we have a front end. Here it is. Yeah, here's my hero stuff. And if we take a close look, here we have our databases. This is database as a service. And to make it very clear why we need this application insights. You see, in real life, what I do is, oh, a lot of people are accessing my hero database because a new, I don't know, cinema movie came out and they all want to know who Deadpool is. I can drag it on I can drag it on to the right-hand side, click on save, and with that we get an entirely new infrastructure. Now let's see, it takes a few more seconds, and now we get 3 in that case, and we now have 3 servers. We have load balancer and firewalls and all these things. And once people are no longer interested in our application, we just say, okay, move it away. We cannot rely on any server-bound, file-bound, Windows event log or whatever infrastructure. We need to have a central logging that is flexible to get data from all these instances. Okay? So now we have scaled our application and it works. It doesn't work. Interesting. Let's run it again. Let's run it again. It worked. It doesn't work. It worked. And I can run it again, and sometimes it fails. And that's exactly the point. What I did, I added some random number, and in 2 out of 10 cases, it throws an exception. Okay? That's all I did. But what should we do? Is it our backend microservice, our frontend microservice? Is it a problem with the database? Is a generated SQL query wrong? What can we do? And this is exactly where Application Insights shines. So I can go in there, and the first thing that I would do is I would take a look at the application map. And in that case, you now understand this chart, because we know that there is a client. Yes, this is a browser client. We could now go into analytics with one click and could, for instance, easily create a statistic of the browser versions, of the regions where our customers came from, and so on and so on. Here is my front-end web server. Up until now, we had 215 requests. We tried it multiple times, and we have a failure rate of 16.3%. As I told you, I added 2 out of 10 on average. So if we would run thousands of them, we should have approximately 20% of failures. And we need 300 milliseconds for that. Hey, what's the problem? Let's take a look. The problem is that our backend accesses some downstream web APIs. And this is our backend, and we see that 9.3% of the failures came from this backend microservice. And there we can now click on Analytics and take a look what's going on here. This brings me in a pre-filtered environment inside of Analytics and shows me exactly the requests I have problems with. Okay, and now I could go into table and take a look at the internal server error stuff, and here I have my dependencies, and I could now tweak this query so that I can pinpoint the exact problem and analyze where my problem is. And if I want to do the same in the source code, I can do that. I can go into my code, open the hero controller, and here I see a lot of requests. This time I also have live data, and I can click on it and drill down in it, and I see here I have my response code, and if I scroll down a little bit, I get all the necessary data that I need to pinpoint my problems. Okay? You get the idea? So what did we have to do to add application insights to my application? We just add an SDK from Microsoft. All major programming languages are supported from Microsoft. And we added this instrumentation key. And with that, everything flew into application insights. And there it was gathered, and we can analyze it. Okay. So if we summarize what application insights is all about, it's a logging and telemetry framework optimized for microservice applications in the cloud. Yes, it works on-premise, but I only know a few customers who really instrument their on-premises servers with application insights. I know some, but most of them run their workload in the cloud. It is optimized for web workloads, and it goes much farther than just doing some logs with stack traces and things like that, and maybe some CPU utilization. It takes a lot of information, and it comes with storage and machine learning out of the box. And this is the specialty of application insights. Thank you very much. I hope you are it was interesting for you. You learned something new. If you have additional questions, come to me to the front. I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference.